She had $2.41. Her baby was crying from hunger. And the only person she could ask for help had changed their phone number. So Clara Whitmore, a broke single mother in the Bronx, texted a stranger by mistake on New Year's Eve, begging for $50 to buy formula. That stranger was a billionaire. And instead of ignoring her message, he showed up at her door at midnight with groceries in his hands and secrets in his past. But here's where the story gets twisted. That wrong number wasn't wrong at all. Someone planned it. Someone wanted Clara to meet this billionaire. Someone was setting a trap that would nearly destroy her daughter, her mother, and everything she loved. What happens when a desperate mother discovers she's been a pawn in a conspiracy worth millions? What happens when the man who saved her turns out to be just as broken as she is? And what happens when the real enemy isn't a stranger, but someone hiding in plain sight? Tonight, you'll witness betrayal from the people closest to you. You'll see a mother lose her child to a system designed to crush her. You'll watch everything fall apart, not once, not twice, but 3 times. And then you'll see something rare, a woman who refuses to stay down, a woman who fights back, a woman who proves that sometimes the wrong number leads to exactly the right destiny. This is the story of Clara Whitmore, and it starts with $50 that changed everything. The lesson. Here's what this story teaches us. When life sends you to rock bottom, the only way out is through, not around, not over, through. Clara didn't win because she was lucky. She won because she refused to quit. She documented everything. She found allies when she thought she was alone. She turned her greatest weakness into her greatest weapon. And most importantly, she learned that asking for help isn't weakness, it's survival. The meaning. This story reminds us that miracles don't fall from the sky. They come from strangers who choose to care. They come from wrong turns that lead to right places. They come from the darkest moments that force us to find our own light. If you're going through something hard right now, remember, Clara. Remember that your rock bottom might be the foundation for something incredible. The rain came down like punishment from heaven. Clara Whitmore knelt on the wet pavement outside Mercy General Hospital, her 8-month-old daughter, Lily, unconscious in her arms. The baby's skin was pale, too pale. Her tiny chest rose and fell in shallow, frightened breaths. Behind Clara, red and blue lights painted the darkness. Police sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. Inside the emergency room, doctors were preparing for her arrival, but Clara could not move. Her legs had given out the moment she stumbled through the ambulance bay doors. 48 hours ago, I thought a billionaire was my miracle. Clara's thoughts raced as she clutched her daughter tighter. Turns out, he was just another man who wanted something from me. And now, my daughter might die because I trusted him. A paramedic rushed toward her. "Ma'am, we need to take the baby now. Ma'am, can you hear me?" Clara looked up, rainwater mixing with tears on her face. She had trusted the wrong person. She had believed in fairy tales. And now Lily was paying the price. How did it come to this? The answer lay 72 hours in the past, before the betrayal, before the conspiracy, before she learned that some miracles are just traps wearing pretty masks. It started, as most disasters do, with a desperate woman and a simple text message. 72 hours earlier, New Year's Eve, 11:47 p.m., the Bronx, New York. The formula can was empty. Clara Whitmore shook it one more time, as if hope alone might make something appear inside. Nothing did. She set it down on the counter of her crumbling studio apartment, where the overhead light had been flickering for 3 days because she could not afford a new bulb. In her arms, 8-month-old Lily whimpered. It was that quiet, exhausted cry of a baby too hungry to scream anymore. The sound that every mother dreads. the sound that meant Clara had failed. "I know, sweetheart." Clara's voice cracked as she bounced her daughter gently. "Mom's working on it, I promise." Outside the thin window, fireworks popped somewhere in the distance. New Year's Eve. The whole world was celebrating, counting down to midnight, making resolutions about gym memberships, and dream vacations and all the things people worried about when they were not wondering how to feed their children. Clara opened her wallet, even though she already knew what she would find. $2.41. Formula cost $18 for the cheap kind. The expensive kind, the sensitive stomach formula that Lily needed because of her reflux, cost $24. She had done the math 100 times. The math never changed. Her phone buzzed with a notification she did not need to read. Rent overdue, 12 days, final notice. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. Clara walked to the window, still bouncing Lily in that automatic rhythm every exhausted mother knows. From here, if she craned her neck just right, she could see Manhattan's skyline glittering across the river, that other world. That place where people were probably drinking champagne right now and wearing clothes that cost more than her monthly rent. 18 months ago, she had been closer to that world. Not rich, never rich, but stable. A real job at Harmon Financial Services in Chicago. Benefits, a desk with her name on it, a husband who said he loved her, a house with a nursery painted yellow because they did not know yet if the baby would be a boy or girl. Then everything fell apart. It started when Clara noticed numbers that did not add up. Small discrepancies at first, transactions flowing to vendors she could not identify, money disappearing into shell companies with addresses that led nowhere. She had asked her supervisor about it. Just a question, just trying to understand. 1 week later, Human Resources called her in. Position eliminated due to restructuring. They took her laptop before she could save anything. Security walked her out like a criminal while her co-workers watched and whispered. That same week, she discovered her husband Brian was sleeping with her younger sister Michelle. The affair had been going on for 2 years, since before the wedding, since before Clara got pregnant. When she confronted Brian, he did not apologize. He did not beg for forgiveness. Instead, he smiled that cold smile she had never seen before and said 5 words that destroyed her life. "I know about your investigation." Within a month, Brian had frozen their joint accounts. He had hired lawyers who painted Clara as mentally unstable. He had convinced a judge that she was unfit to stay in the family home while pregnant. She lost everything: the house, the savings, the future she thought she had built. The only person who helped her was Evelyn Marshall, a 67-year-old woman who ran a shelter for homeless mothers called Harbor Grace. Evelyn had given Clara a bed when she had nowhere else to go. She had held Clara's hand during labor when Lily was born. She had helped Clara find this apartment, small and falling apart as it was. Clara had not spoken to Evelyn in 3 months. Pride, mostly. She wanted to prove she could make it on her own. But tonight, with Lily hungry and the formula gone and midnight approaching, Clara had no pride left. She pulled out her phone and found Evelyn's number. The one she had saved 18 months ago and never used. Her fingers shook as she typed. "Mrs. Evelyn, I know tonight is busy, and I'm so sorry to bother you, but I don't have anyone else. Lily's formula ran out, and I only have $2. I just need $50 to get through until my paycheck Friday. I promise I'll pay you back. I'm so sorry. I'm so ashamed. Please." She hit send before she could talk herself out of it. 11:51 p.m. What Clara did not know, what she could not possibly know, was that Evelyn Marshall had changed her phone number 2 weeks ago. The old number now belonged to someone else entirely. Someone who would change Clara's life forever. For better or for worse, she had not yet decided. Manhattan, the Mercer penthouse, same moment. 47 floors above the glittering madness of Times Square, Ethan Mercer stood alone in an $87 million penthouse that felt more like a prison than a home. The space around him was a monument to success. Italian marble floors polished to a mirror shine, museum-quality art that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Furniture designed by architects whose names appeared in textbooks. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, he could see Central Park to the north, the Hudson River to the west, the endless sprawl of downtown Manhattan to the south. On the kitchen island, a bottle of Dom Perignon sat untouched. His assistant had left it with a cheerful note reminding him that the New Year's Eve gala at the Ritz-Carlton was expecting him at 10 o'clock. Ethan had not gone to the gala. He told himself he was tired. Early meetings on January 2nd, he had been to enough parties to last several lifetimes. The truth was simpler and more pathetic. He could not stand one more countdown, surrounded by people who wanted things from him. His money, his connections, his face on their charity boards, his signature on their investment documents. Nobody at that gala would see him. They would see what he could give them. And Ethan Mercer, despite all his billions, was tired of being used. His phone buzzed. The screen showed 47 missed calls from a contact labeled Victoria, his soon-to-be ex-wife. He ignored the notification like he had ignored all the others. The divorce papers sat on his desk, unsigned. Not because he did not want the divorce. He wanted it desperately. But Victoria was fighting for half of everything, and her lawyers were ruthless, and somewhere in the middle of all that legal warfare, Ethan had lost the energy to care. His eyes drifted to a photograph on the bookshelf. A young boy, maybe 10 years old, smiling at the camera, with Ethan's own eyes looking back. The frame was face down. Ethan had turned it that way 3 years ago and never found the courage to turn it back. Jason, his son, dead at 11 years old. According to the documents Victoria had shown him, a car accident while visiting relatives in Connecticut. Ethan had not even been told in time to say goodbye. He poured himself another whiskey. The third one tonight. Maybe the fourth. Then his phone buzzed again. Not Victoria this time. An unknown number. Probably another pitch from some startup founder who had somehow gotten his personal line, or a scam. He almost swiped it away without looking, but the preview caught his eye. Lily's formula ran out, and I only have $2. Ethan opened the message and read it fully. Then he read it again, and a third time. This was not a scam. Scammers did not apologize this much. Scammers asked for wire transfers and cryptocurrency, not $50. This was real. Someone had texted a wrong number, reaching out to a lifeline that was not there, asking for $50 to feed their baby on New Year's Eve. $50. The automatic tip Ethan left on a bar tab without thinking. The cost of the appetizer he had sent back last week because it was not quite warm enough. The amount he spent on coffee in a single day without noticing. Something cold moved through his chest, a memory he had spent 30 years trying to bury. Queens. A one-room apartment above a laundromat. His mother Dorothy on the phone, crying, begging someone whose voice Ethan could not hear. Please, I just need $50 for his medicine. Please, I'll pay you back, I promise. Please don't hang up. The person hung up. 3 weeks later, Dorothy Mercer was dead. Pneumonia, the doctors said. But 8-year-old Ethan knew the truth. His mother died of poverty, of not being able to afford to take time off when she was sick, of not having insurance, of a system that chewed up people like her and spit out their bones. After that came foster care, group homes, years of surviving, because no one was going to save him. He built Mercer Capital from nothing, made himself into someone the world could not ignore, accumulated more money than any human could spend in 100 lifetimes. But he had never forgotten that apartment above the laundromat. He had never forgotten his mother's voice, apologizing for things that were not her fault. "I'm sorry, baby. Mama's working on it." Ethan set down his whiskey glass and picked up his phone. He called the only person he trusted with tasks that required both speed and discretion. "Marcus, I need you to trace a phone number. Bescheid so now." His head of security did not ask questions. That was why Ethan paid him $300,000 a year. 12 minutes later, Ethan had everything. Clara Whitmore, 34 years old, address apartment 4F, 1847, Sedgwick Avenue, Riverdale, the Bronx. Single mother, one daughter, 8 months old. Former senior accountant at Harmon Financial Services in Chicago. Terminated 3 months ago under suspicious circumstances. Currently working part-time as a cashier at Quick Mart for $12.75 an hour. No benefits. The credit report made his chest tight. Maxed out cards. Medical debt from childbirth that she was paying down $25 at a time. A car repossessed 2 months ago. Preliminary eviction paperwork filed 3 days ago. This woman was drowning, just like his mother had drowned 33 years ago, while the world celebrated and counted down and made resolutions they would never keep. Ethan grabbed his coat from the closet, not the casual one, the warm one, the one designed for actually being outside instead of walking from a heated car to a heated building. Marcus appeared in the doorway, already knowing what his boss was planning. "Sir, it's almost midnight. The Bronx is not exactly safe at this hour, I'm aware. What exactly are you planning to do?" Ethan turned to face him. For a moment his mask of billionaire composure slipped, and underneath was something raw, something human. "I'm planning to answer the call my mother never got answered." Marcus studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll pull the car around. We should stop for supplies on the way." They left the $87 million penthouse at 11:58 p.m. By the time the fireworks exploded over Times Square and the world screamed Happy New Year, Ethan Mercer was already on his way to change a stranger's life, whether she wanted him to or not. Clara's apartment, 12:07 a.m., January 1st. The knock on the door made Clara's heart stop. Nobody knocked on doors in this building at midnight. Nobody with good intentions, anyway. The hallways were not safe after dark. Everyone knew that. Everyone stayed inside, with their deadbolts locked and their chains secured. Clara clutched Lily tighter, backing away from the door. Her phone was in her hand, thumb hovering over the emergency call button. "Who is it?" Her voice came out stronger than she felt. A pause. Then a man's voice, deep and calm. "My name is Ethan Mercer. I received a text message meant for someone named Evelyn, a message asking for help." Clara's blood turned to ice. That was impossible. She had texted Evelyn's number. She knew she had, unless the number had changed, unless the message went somewhere else entirely. "I don't know what you're talking about." The man's voice remained patient. "You asked for $50 for baby formula. You apologized 4 times in 3 sentences. You said you would pay it back." Clara pressed her back against the far wall, Lily whimpering against her chest. "How did you find my address?" "I traced the number." "That's stalking." A brief silence. Then, with something almost like humor, "That's resourcefulness." "There's a difference." Clara's fear mixed with anger. "The difference is money. Rich people call it resourcefulness. Poor people go to jail for it." "Fair point." The man's voice softened. "I'm not here to hurt you. I brought formula, the expensive kind. And groceries, no strings attached. Please open the door. Why would you do that? Clara demanded. Who are you? Another pause, longer this time. When the man spoke again, his voice had changed. Rougher, more real. My mother died when I was 8 years old. She could not afford medicine. She asked people for help, and no one came. His words hung in the air like ghosts. Tonight, the need came directly to me. So here I am. Clara did not move for what felt like eternity. Every instinct screamed danger. Every lesson life had taught her said that men who showed up at midnight with gifts always wanted something in return. But Lily was hungry. And the man on the other side of the door had just described her worst fear, being the mother who could not provide, being the mother who asked for help and watched her child suffer anyway. She crept to the door and looked through the peephole. A man stood in the flickering hallway light, expensive coat, dark hair slightly disheveled, eyes that looked tired rather than threatening. Behind him, a large black man in a security uniform stood at respectful distance. Clara had seen that face before. On magazine covers, on business news programs, on lists of the world's wealthiest people. Ethan Mercer, the billionaire, the orphan who built an empire, the man whose charity foundation helped shelters all over the country, including, she realized with a jolt, Harbor Grace, the shelter where Evelyn Marshall worked. Her fingers trembled as she unlatched the chain. The door opened 3 inches. Their eyes met through this gap. You're really him. Claire's voice was barely above a whisper. You're actually Ethan Mercer. I am. He held up shopping bags, and she could see formula cans inside. The premium brand, 3 of them. And you're Clara Whitmore. Now, may I please come in before your daughter gets any hungrier? Clara looked at the bags. She looked at her daughter, whose cries had faded to exhausted whimpers. She looked at the man who had every reason to be celebrating in a penthouse tonight, but was instead standing in a moldy hallway in the Bronx. She opened the door. The apartment was the saddest space Ethan had ever entered. A hot plate on a rickety table because the stove did not work. A mattress on the floor because bed frames cost money. A crib that looked like it came from a garage sale, which it probably did. An empty formula can on the counter, like a monument to everything that had gone wrong. Ethan did not comment on any of it. He simply set the bags on the counter and began unpacking. Formula, diapers, baby food, infant Tylenol, a soft blanket with stars on it, fresh fruit, good bread, real food. Clara watched him, too stunned to speak. I believe someone is hungry, Ethan said gently, handing her a prepared bottle. Lily latched on the moment the nipple touched her lips. Her tiny hands grasped at the bottle like she was afraid it might disappear. Her eyes slowly closed in contentment, and Clara felt tears streaming down her own face. There you go, sweetheart, there you go. Ethan moved to the window, giving her space. The city glittered outside, fireworks still popping in the distance. He stood with his hands in his pockets. Looking at nothing, looking at everything. Clara studied him while Lily fed. He looked different than she expected a billionaire to look. His coat was expensive, yes, but he had unbuttoned it and pushed up the sleeves. His hair was slightly disheveled, and his eyes, when they caught the flickering light, held something she recognized immediately. Loneliness. She saw it because she saw the same thing in her own mirror every day. You didn't have to do this, Clara said finally, her voice thick. I asked for $50. I know. Ethan did not turn from the window. You also apologized 4 times in 3 sentences. That told me everything I needed to know about your character. Clara flushed. I don't usually ask for help like that. I've never actually asked anyone for money before. Not like that. What happened? His voice was gentle, not demanding. She could have refused to answer, But something about him, his calmness, his complete lack of judgment, made her want to tell the truth. I got fired 3 months ago. Clara adjusted Lily in her arm. From Harmon Financial in Chicago. I was a senior accountant, and I found something in the books. Transactions that didn't make sense. Money going to vendors that didn't seem to exist. Ethan turned from the window. His posture had shifted, attentive. I asked my supervisor about it. Just a question. Clara's voice hardened at the memory. A week later, they called me into HR. Position eliminated. They took my laptop before I could save anything. And you were really looking. It was my job. Numbers stick in my head. They always have. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful. Harmon Financial Services. I know that company. They're a partner on several projects I'm involved with, including a charitable foundation. Clara looked up sharply. What foundation? Hopebridge. We provide grants to shelters supporting women and children in poverty. Ethan met her eyes, including a place called Harbor Grace Shelter. The room seemed to shrink around Clara. The same shelter Evelyn Marshall ran. The same shelter that had saved her life when she was pregnant and homeless. You're telling me the company that fired me is partnered with your foundation? Clara's head spun. The foundation that funds the shelter where I was going to ask for help? It appears so. That can't be a coincidence. Ethan's jaw tightened. I don't believe in coincidences either. 3 weeks later, mid-January. The check arrived by courier 3 days after New Year's Eve, enough to cover a month of childcare and groceries, with a handwritten note and elegant script. No strings. This is so you have time to think clearly. Call when you're ready. Ethan. Clara almost sent it back. Pride was a hell of a thing, even when you had nothing else. But then Lily got an ear infection, emergency room visit, antibiotics, bills she could not pay. She cashed the check. For 2 weeks, she tried to convince herself that the midnight visit was a one-time miracle. A strange rich man doing a strange good deed, nothing more. But the numbers kept nagging at her. The patterns she had seen at Harmon, the connection to Ethan's foundation, the way her termination had been so swift, so coordinated, so clearly designed to silence her before she could dig deeper. On a cold Tuesday afternoon, Clara called the number on Ethan's card. He answered on the second ring. Clara, I was hoping you would call. I need to know, she said without preamble, the irregularities I found at Harmon. Do you think they're connected to your foundation? A pause. That's exactly what I need to find out. How soon can you come to my office? The Mercer Capitol building was a 40-story glass tower in Midtown Manhattan that seemed designed to intimidate visitors before they reached the elevator. It was definitely working. Clara wore her only interview outfit. A black blazer from Goodwill that almost fit. Pants that did not quite match. Shoes she had polished until the scuffs nearly disappeared. She felt like a fraud walking through the marble lobby, surrounded by people, in clothes that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Lily was at daycare for the first time since Clara lost her job. That alone felt like a miracle. The executive floor was glass and chrome and carefully positioned greenery. Ethan's assistant, a silver-haired woman named Helen, led Clara through an open workspace where people in expensive suits solved expensive problems. She felt their eyes. Who is she? Why is she here? What does Ethan Mercer want with her? Claire wondered the same things. Ethan's office was enormous. Windows on 2 sides framed Manhattan like a photograph. A desk the size of a small aircraft carrier. Art that belonged in a museum. And Ethan himself, standing by the window in a charcoal suit, looking nothing like the man who had carried grocery bags into her crumbling apartment. Clara. Please sit. She perched on the edge of an expensive leather chair. Ethan took the seat beside her instead of behind the desk. Before we talk about work, I want to make something clear. Whatever you decide today, the help I've already provided comes with no conditions. If you don't want this job, you're under no obligation. Those were gifts, not payments. Clara had not expected that. The men in her life had always attached strings. Her husband Brian had used money as a weapon. Her father had controlled her mother the same way. Gifts that became chains, kindness that became debt. I understand, she said carefully. Good. Ethan leaned back. I've had my team run a quiet audit of transactions between Harmon and my Hope Bridge Foundation. What we found was concerning. Clara's stomach dropped. What did you find? Nothing conclusive, which is suspicious. The records are too clean, too perfect. In my experience, when something looks that perfect, it's been manufactured. I don't have proof. They took everything. You have your memory. Ethan's eyes met hers. You said numbers stick. They do. Clara nodded slowly. But I can't go to the FBI and say I remember transactions I can't document. No. But you can help me find new evidence. Clara stared at him. The afternoon light caught the exhaustion in his face, the determination underneath it. I want to hire you, Ethan continued. Not as a regular accountant. I need you working directly with me. Special projects, internal investigations. Why me? You have teams of auditors, people with credentials, people with experience, people who might be compromised. His voice hardened. The person I suspect has been here from nearly the beginning. He has allies everywhere. I need someone I can trust, someone who doesn't owe anyone here anything, someone who already found something once. You think you can trust me? Clara heard herself ask. We've met twice. You could have asked for much more than $50. When you realized who I was, you could have made demands. Instead, you've spent 3 weeks trying to figure out how to pay me back for formula. Ethan's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. That tells me more about your character than any background check. Clara felt her face warm. What exactly would this job involve? Ethan outlined it. Special projects, auditor reporting directly to him, access to all financial records, salary 3 times what she had made at Harmon, plus benefits, on-site daycare, so Lily could be in the same building. It was the best offer Clara had ever received, also potentially the most dangerous. If I find something, she said slowly, what happens to me? Last time I asked questions, I lost everything. Last time you were alone. Ethan's voice was quiet but certain. This time, you have me. Clara thought about Lily, about Bill's, about Harbor Grace, and all the women depending on support that might be getting stolen. About her mother, still recovering from a stroke in an Ohio nursing home, still needing care Clara could barely afford to provide. When do I start? 1 month later, late February, Clara learned to watch Douglas Crane without appearing to watch him. Ethan had not explicitly told her who he suspected, but she was not stupid. The CFO of Mercer Capital was 52 years old, silver-haired and silver-tongued, with charisma that made people want to agree with him even when they knew better. He had been Ethan's partner since nearly the beginning. One of the first investors. One of the architects of the company's growth. He was also the person who signed off on all charitable disbursements. Every time Crane walked through the office, people straightened in their seats. Every time he smiled, it felt like a transaction. Miss Whitmore. Crane approached her in the break room one afternoon, coffee cup in hand. His smile did not reach his eyes. I don't believe we've been properly introduced. Douglas Crane. Mr. Crane, nice to meet you. Ethan tells me you're working on special projects. His tone was light, conversational, very mysterious. What exactly are these special projects? Mr. Mercer has me well set up. Clara kept her voice neutral. Internal auditing. Compliance review. Nothing exciting. Of course, another smile. Well, if you need anything, my door's always open. He walked away, and Clara felt the hair rise on the back of her neck. She texted Ethan immediately. Crane introduced himself, asked about my work. The reply came seconds later. We knew he'd notice. Be careful. Weeks turned into months. Clara settled into a routine. Daycare drop-off at 7:30. Work until 6. Dinner and bath time and bedtime stories. And somewhere between spreadsheets and sleepless nights, she began to find the pattern. It was elegant. Whoever designed this theft had skill. Small amounts, never enough to trigger automatic flags. Distributed across dozens of vendors, many of them legitimate, until you trace the money further. Shell companies in multiple jurisdictions. Trails that went cold just when you thought you had found something. But Clara's memory did not let trails go cold. She remembered the vendors from Harmon. She found the same names, or suspiciously similar ones, in Hope Bridge's records. Someone had been stealing from the foundation for years, millions of dollars that should have gone to shelters, to children's programs, to people like her, diverted into accounts she was slowly tracing back to their source. And all the authorizations led to Douglas Crane. On a Thursday evening, in late February, Clara presented her preliminary findings to Ethan. They were alone in his office, the city lights glittering outside. This is Crane. She spread printouts across his desk. The shell companies trace back to entities he controls. The timing of transfers correlates with his travel schedule. And these transaction patterns are identical to what I saw at Harmon. Ethan studied the documents. His face was unreadable, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. How long? At least 5 years. Possibly longer. How much? Clara had done the math. Between $12 and $15 million. Ethan set the papers down carefully. Douglas Crane. I trusted him with everything. He was there when I was nothing, just a kid with an idea and no backing. He believed in me before anyone else. I'm sorry. Don't be. You did your job. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers. We need more. Crane has lawyers. Good ones. We need a witness who can connect the dots. I might know someone. Claire had been preparing for this. When I worked at Harmon, there was a manager named Tommy Richardson. He tried to warn me once. I think he knew what was happening, but was too scared to say anything. Find him carefully. That night, Clara went home feeling something she had not felt in months. Hope. They were close. Close to exposing the truth. Close to justice. She bought Lily a new toy with her first paycheck. She smiled at strangers on the subway. She allowed herself, for one dangerous moment, to believe that things might actually be okay. The hammer fell the next day. Clara came home from work to find her apartment door open. Inside stood her landlord, 2 police officers, and a woman in a gray suit holding a clipboard. Ms. Whitmore, the woman stepped forward. I'm Sandra Peters, from Child Protective Services. We've received an anonymous report of child neglect. We need to inspect your living conditions. Clara's blood turned to ice. What? No, that's not possible. I haven't done anything wrong. The officers spread through the apartment. The CPS worker began opening cabinets, checking the refrigerator, examining every corner of Clara's life. Ma'am, this electric bill shows you're 12 days past due. I paid that. Clara's voice rose. I have the confirmation email on my phone. But when she checked, the email was gone, deleted somehow, and the power company had no record of her payment. In the refrigerator, the CPS worker found moldy containers Clara had never seen before. On the bathroom floor, someone had scattered pills from a bottle she did not recognize. It was a setup. Professional. Thorough. Designed to destroy her. Ms. Whitmore, I'm sorry. The CPS worker's voice held no sympathy. Based on what we've found, we need to place your daughter in temporary protective custody, pending investigation. No. Clara's legs gave out. She collapsed against the wall. No, please. Someone did this. This isn't real. Please don't take my baby. Please. The officers moved toward Lily's crib, where the baby was beginning to cry. Ma'am, you need to step back. Please. Clara was sobbing now, reaching for her daughter. Please, she's all I have. She's all I have. They took Lily from the crib. They carried her out the door. They put her in a car and drove away, while Clara screamed in the hallway, screamed until her voice gave out, screamed until the neighbors stopped looking, and closed their doors because this was the city and people minded their own business. When the silence finally came, Clara sat on the floor of her empty apartment, surrounded by evidence she had not planted, and understood the truth. Douglas Crane was sending a message: stop digging or lose everything. The next morning, Mercer Capital. Clara arrived at Ethan's office looking like a ghost. Red-rimmed eyes, hands that would not stop shaking, a voice that cracked on every other word. Crane did this. She stood in front of Ethan's desk, too wired to sit. He's trying to silence me. Ethan's face was pale with fury. We can't prove it. I don't need to prove it. I need to destroy him. If we move too fast, we lose everything. We need evidence. We need documentation. We need a case that will actually hold up. My daughter's in foster care, Claire exploded. Evidence can wait. Lily can't. Ethan rose from his chair and crossed to her. His hands found her shoulders, steadying her. Listen to me. His voice was low, intense. I understand. I understand more than you know. But if we go after Crane without a solid case, he wins. He buries us in legal proceedings. He claims defamation. He ties us up in courts for years while your daughter stays in the system. Clara's tears were hot on her cheeks. Then what do I do? How do I get her back? We get you a lawyer, a good one. We prove the evidence was planted. We get Lily home. Ethan's grip on her shoulders tightened. And then we finish what you started. We take Crane down properly. But Clara could not wait. Against Ethan's advice, she stormed into Crane's office that afternoon, past his startled assistant, past the security guard who reached for her arm. Crane looked up from his desk with an expression of mild interest. Miss Whitmore, you seem upset. Family trouble? I know what you're doing. Clara's voice shook with rage. The shell companies, the stolen funds, the money you've been siphoning from Ethan's foundation for years. Crane leaned back in his chair. That's quite an accusation. Do you have any evidence? You took my daughter. I have no idea what you're talking about. Crane's smile was ice, but I will say this. He rose from his chair, crossed the room, stopped close enough that Clara could smell his expensive cologne. Your mother, he said softly. She works at Sunrise Nursing Home in Ohio, doesn't she? Room 412? Had a stroke last year. Needs constant care. He tilted his head. She seems so fragile these days. It would be a shame if her care became complicated. Clara's blood went cold. Walk away, Miss Whitmore. Crane's whisper was almost gentle. Take whatever Ethan's paying you and disappear. Find a new life, somewhere far away. Or watch everyone you love suffer. Your daughter, your mother, anyone else you get close to. He stepped back, adjusting his tie. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a meeting. Close the door on your way out. Clara walked out of his office on legs that felt like water. She made it to the elevator before she started shaking. She made it to the parking garage before she threw up. That night, she called Tommy Richardson from a burner phone. The former Harmon manager agreed to meet her at a diner in Jersey City. Somewhere Crane's people could not easily follow. Tommy was thinner than she remembered. Nervous. His eyes kept darting to the windows. You want to take down Crane? He laughed bitterly. Lady, people who try that end up ruined. Or worse. I'm already ruined. Clara's voice was flat. He took my daughter. What else can he do? Tommy was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a USB drive. I have files, he said. Everything. Transaction records, internal emails, wire transfer confirmations. I copied them the week before they fired me. I've been too scared to use them for 5 years. Clara stared at the small plastic rectangle that could change everything. Give them to me. They'll kill us. Tommy's hand was trembling. You understand that, right? If Crane finds out I talked to you, we're both dead. Maybe. Clara met his eyes. But at least we'll die fighting. Tommy slid the USB drive across the table. God help us both. 2 weeks later, early March. The court hearing was supposed to be a formality. Clara's lawyer, a shark of a woman named Patricia Morrison, who Ethan had hired, had documented everything. The deleted payment confirmations that Clara had recovered from her email provider's servers. The moldy food that fingerprint analysis showed Clara had never touched. The pill bottle that contained her name, but had been filled at a pharmacy 300 miles away in a city she had never visited. The evidence of a setup was overwhelming. Judge Harrison granted temporary custody back to Clara within 15 minutes. Lily was returned to her mother's arms in the hallway outside the courtroom, and for one beautiful moment, Clara thought the worst was over. She brought Lily to the office the next day, showed her the daycare, introduced her to the teachers, watched her daughter play with blocks, while Clara worked through the files Tommy had provided. The data was everything they needed. Transaction trails leading directly to Crane's offshore accounts, emails showing coordination between Crane and executives, at Harmon Financial, proof that millions had been stolen over nearly a decade. We have him, Clara told Ethan that evening. Everything Tommy saved, it's enough, more than enough. Ethan studied the documents, his face cycling through shock, anger, and something that looked like grief. I trusted him, he said quietly. I trusted him with everything. I know. He was there when no one else believed in me. When I was just a kid from Queens with nothing but ideas. Douglas Crane wrote me my first investment check. Clara reached across the desk and touched his hand. Sometimes the people we trust the most are the ones who hurt us the worst. I know that better than anyone. Ethan looked at her hand on his. Something shifted in his expression. Something warmer. I'm sorry, he said, for everything you've been through, for everything Crane put you through because of me. It's not because of you, Clara's voice was firm. It's because of him, because he chose greed over decency. That's not your fault. If I had seen it sooner, if I had paid more attention to the foundation's finances instead of leaving everything to him, then someone else would have gotten hurt instead of me. Clara squeezed his hand. The point is, we see it now, and we're going to stop him. For a long moment, they sat in silence, her hand on his, the city lights glittering outside the windows. Something was shifting between them, something that felt dangerous and inevitable and entirely too complicated. Then Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and his face went pale. What is it? Ethan held up the phone so she could see the news alert. Former financial executive found dead. Tommy Richardson, 48, was discovered this morning in his Jersey City apartment. Police are investigating an apparent suicide. Clara felt the world tilt sideways. No, she whispered. No, that's not possible. I talked to him 3 days ago. He was scared, but he wasn't suicidal. He gave me everything because he wanted to fight. I know. They killed him. Clara's voice rose. Crane killed him. We can't prove that. We don't need to prove it. Clara was on her feet now, pacing. We have his files. We have everything he gave us. We can still take Crane down. Ethan's phone buzzed again. And again. His face grew more ashen with each message. What now? Your mother. Ethan's voice was hollow. There's been an incident at her nursing home. A medication error. She's in the ICU. Clara grabbed the phone. and read the message herself. The words blurted through her tears. No, 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 no. I'll have my jet ready in an hour. You need to go to her, but the investigation, Crane, can wait. Ethan's hands found her shoulders. Your mother needs you. Everything else can wait. Clara flew to Ohio that night. For 3 days, she sat by her mother's bedside while doctors ran tests and adjusted medications and offered careful optimism that did little to ease her terror. Margaret Whitmore had received 3 times her normal dose of blood thinners. An accident, the nursing home claimed. A new nurse who misread the chart. But Clara knew better. She saw Crane's fingerprints all over this quiet, almost murder. On the 4th day, her mother stabilized. Clara flew back to New York, exhausted and grief-stricken, and burning with a rage that felt like it might consume her from the inside. She walked into Ethan's office to find him staring at a television screen. "What now?" she asked, too tired to brace herself. Ethan turned the volume up. Breaking news tonight from the world of high finance. Billionaire Ethan Mercer is facing serious allegations of money laundering through his charitable foundation. Sources close to the investigation say a whistleblower has come forward with documents suggesting the Hope Bridge Foundation has been used to funnel millions in illicit funds. Clara's photo appeared on screen next to Ethan's. The alleged scheme reportedly involves Clara Whitmore, a former accountant, who sources describe as Mercer's mistress. Court documents obtained by our investigation team paint a picture of a wealthy executive using a charity as a personal piggy bank while carrying on an affair with a woman he rescued from homelessness. Clara watched her life collapse in real time on national television. Who did this? Her voice was barely audible. Victoria. Ethan's jaw was tight enough to shatter. My ex-wife. She's been working with Crane the whole time. That night, Clara's apartment. Clara sat on the floor of her living room, Lily asleep in the next room, her phone buzzing endlessly with messages from strangers who had seen the news. Homewrecker, gold digger. I hope your baby gets taken away again. Your mother should have died. She deleted them without reading past the first lines. There were hundreds, thousands maybe. The internet had decided she was a villain, and the internet was hungry for villains. Everything was gone, her reputation, destroyed by a single news broadcast. Tommy dead because he tried to help her. Her mother, still fragile in an Ohio hospital bed. The evidence, now tainted by accusations that she had fabricated it as part of some elaborate scheme. Clara thought about running, not dying. She would never leave Lily, but disappearing, taking her daughter and vanishing to somewhere no one would find them. Starting over with a new name in a new city where no one knew her face. She opened her laptop, looked at bus tickets to nowhere. A knock on the door made her freeze. More reporters, more harassment, more proof that her life was no longer her own. Clara, honey, open the door. It's Evelyn. The voice made her heart stutter. She crossed the room and looked through the peephole. Evelyn Marshall stood in the hallway, 67 years old, silver hair pulled back in a practical bun, eyes full of the same fierce compassion Clara remembered from the worst nights of her pregnancy. Clara opened the door. I saw the news. Evelyn stepped inside without waiting to be invited. I know that girl they're describing isn't you, Mrs. Evelyn. You shouldn't be here. Clara's voice cracked. I'm toxic. Everyone who helps me gets hurt. Tommy is dead. My mother almost died. If something happened to you because of me, I couldn't live with it. Sweetheart, I've been helping women in trouble for 40 years. Evelyn set down her purse and fixed Clara with a look that brooked no argument. You think you're the first one to warn me away? I've faced down abusive husbands with guns. I've testified against drug dealers who threatened to burn down my shelter. I've buried women I couldn't save and kept showing up the next day for the ones I could. She sat down on the couch and patted the cushion beside her. Now, tell me everything. And then we're going to figure out how to burn these bastards to the ground. Clara sat, and she talked. For 2 hours, she told Evelyn everything. The investigation at Harmon, the wrong number text, Ethan showing up at midnight, the job, the evidence, Crane's threats, Tommy's death, her mother's accident, the media firestorm. When she finished, Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. So this Crane person has been stealing from Ethan's foundation for years, she finally said, and the foundation is one of our biggest donors, which means he's been stealing from me, from my shelter, from every woman and child who's come through my doors. Clara nodded. Millions of dollars that should have gone to people who needed it. Evelyn's eyes turned to steel. Then we don't just expose him, we destroy him. The next day, Clara called Ethan. I have a plan, she said, but it's risky. More risky than doing nothing and watching Crane walk away with everything. Number Clara took a breath. I want to set a trap. I want to make Crane confess on the record. I'm listening. 3 days later, the Mercer penthouse. Ethan announced his defeat publicly. A press conference covered by every major network. After careful consideration, he said, reading from a prepared statement, I have decided to step down from my position as CEO of Mercer Capital. Douglas Crane will assume leadership of the company effective immediately. I want to thank Douglas for his years of service and his willingness to take on this responsibility during a difficult time. The business world reacted with shock. Ethan Mercer surrendering, handing his empire to the man accused of robbing him. But Crane bought it. Victoria bought it. They thought they had won. 3 days after the press conference, Crane received an invitation to a private celebration at the Mercer penthouse. Just the 4 of them. Ethan, Victoria, Crane, and Margaret Sullivan, the company's chief legal officer. A victory toast, the invitation said. Time to put the past behind us and move forward. What Crane did not know was that Margaret Sullivan had been working with Ethan for months, quietly gathering evidence, waiting for the right moment. What Victoria did not know was that Clara was already in the penthouse, hidden in a service room off the main hall, recording every word. What neither of them knew was that the FBI was listening live. The celebration began at 8 o'clock. Champagne was poured. Pleasantries were exchanged. Crane made a toast to new beginnings. Then Ethan set down his glass and let his mask slip. 12 years, he said quietly. 12 years, Douglas. I gave you everything. I trusted you like a brother. And the whole time you were stealing from me. Crane's smile flickered. Ethan, we agreed to put the past behind us. No, we agreed to celebrate. And I want to know what we're celebrating exactly. Ethan's voice hardened. The millions you stole? The charities you robbed? The people who died because money that should have helped them ended up in your offshore accounts? This is absurd. Crane set down his champagne glass. I thought we had an understanding. We do. Ethan's eyes were cold. I understand now what you really are. Victoria stepped forward, her face tight with anger. Ethan, don't do this. You'll regret it. Will I? Ethan turned to face his ex-wife. Will I regret knowing that my partner and my wife were sleeping together for 7 years while I built an empire you both planned to steal? The room went silent. How long did you think I was stupid, Victoria? How long did you think I wouldn't figure it out? Victoria's composure cracked. You were always too busy saving strangers to notice what was happening in your own house. I was building a legacy. I was trying to help people. You were playing hero while I did the real work. Victoria's voice rose. I introduced you to every investor. I made every connection that mattered. And what did I get? A prenup that leaves me with nothing. Crane moved to stand beside Victoria. Ethan, let's be reasonable. We can work this out. There's no need for accusation that can't be proven. Can't they? Ethan reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. I have records, Douglas. Every shell company, every wire transfer, every signature you thought was hidden. Crane's face went pale. Where did you get those? It doesn't matter. What matters is that I know, and soon, everyone will know. You think you can use those against me? Crane's voice turned ugly. I have lawyers who will eat you alive. I have connections you can't imagine. People more powerful than you have tried to take me down and failed. From her hiding spot, Clara watched the monitors showing the penthouse's interior cameras. She held her breath as the confrontation escalated. And Tommy Richardson, Ethan asked, what happened to him? Crane shrugged. Loose ends get tied. It's business, he confessed. On camera, to murder. Victoria moved to Crane's side. Tell him the rest, Douglas. Tell him about his precious little charity case. Crane's smile returned. Ah yes, Clara Whitmore, your homeless damsel in distress. Did you really think that was coincidence, Ethan? A wrong number text that just happened to reach you at your lowest moment? Ethan's expression flickered. What are you saying? Victoria laughed. I changed Evelyn Marshall's phone number 2 weeks before New Year's. I made sure that pathetic text went to you instead. I wanted you to find Clara. Why? Because I needed a scapegoat. Victoria's voice was triumphant. When the money started disappearing, when questions started being asked, I needed someone to take the fall. A desperate single mother with a history of making accusations? Perfect. I just didn't expect you to fall in love with her. Clara felt her blood freeze. She had been a pawn from the very beginning. Everything she thought was fate had been manipulation. But there was more. Tell him about the boy, Crane said softly. Tell him about Jason. Ethan went still. What about Jason? Victoria's smile was cruel. Your son? Ethan. The one you abandoned? The one you thought died in that car accident 3 years ago? He's dead. You showed me the death certificate. I showed you what I needed you to see. Victoria leaned forward. Jason is alive. He's been living in Connecticut the whole time, with my sister. I've been raising him as my nephew for 3 years. Ethan staggered like he had been shot. You told me my son was dead. His voice was barely a whisper. You let me grieve. You watched me fall apart. And he was alive the whole time? And when this is over, Victoria said, you'll never see him again. Clara had heard enough. She stepped out of the service room, phone in hand, recording light blinking. Wrong. Crane and Victoria spun to face her. Clara held up the phone. The FBI has heard everything. Every confession, every threat, every lie. The penthouse doors burst open. Federal agents swarmed into the room, weapons drawn. Douglas Crane. You're under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit murder. Victoria Mercer, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and kidnapping. Crane lunged toward Clara, but agents intercepted him before he got close. You think this is over? He snarled as they forced him to his knees. I have friends in places you can't imagine. This is just the beginning. Clara walked toward him slowly. She stopped close enough to see the fear finally breaking through his arrogance. You threatened my daughter. You killed my friend. You tried to murder my mother. And you thought I would run? She leaned down until her face was inches from his. I'm a mother from the Bronx. We don't run. We survive, and then we win. The agents dragged him away. Victoria screamed obscenities as she was handcuffed and led toward the door. This isn't over, she shrieked. You haven't won anything. But she was wrong. They had won everything. 6 months later, October. The trials made national news for weeks. Clara testified for 3 days. Every detail she remembered, every number, every transaction, every threat. The jury watched surveillance footage of Crane confessing to murder. They read emails showing years of coordinated theft. They heard audio of Victoria admitting she had faked a child's death to torture her own husband. The verdicts came on a Friday afternoon in early October. Douglas Crane, guilty on 47 counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit murder, sentenced to 47 years in federal prison. Victoria Mercer, guilty on 31 counts of fraud, conspiracy, and custodial interference, sentenced to 32 years with no possibility of parole. 3 executives from Harmon Financial received sentences ranging from 15 to 25 years. The Hope Bridge Foundation was restructured under new leadership. Clara was named executive director, overseeing the distribution of millions in grants to shelters across the country. Her mother made a full recovery. The nursing home settled out of court for an amount that would cover her care for the rest of her life. Tommy Richardson's family received $5 million from the recovered funds. His name was cleared posthumously. A scholarship in his honor was established at his alma mater. And Ethan met his son. The reunion happened in a therapist's office in Hartford, Connecticut. Ethan sat on one side of the room. Jason, now 14 years old, sat on the other. The boy had his father's eyes, his father's stubborn jaw, his father's way of holding himself like he expected the world to disappoint him. "Why didn't you come for me?" Jason asked. His voice was rough, with anger and hurt, and 3 years of believing his father had abandoned him. "I thought you were dead." Ethan's voice broke on the words. "They showed me proof. A death certificate? Accident reports? I grieved for you every single day. You believed them. You didn't fight." Ethan leaned forward, tears streaming down his face. "You're right. I didn't fight hard enough. I trusted people I shouldn't have trusted. I let my grief convince me that there was nothing I could do. So what now? Now I spend the rest of my life trying to make it right." Ethan's voice was steady despite his tears. "If you'll let me, if you can ever forgive me." Jason was quiet for a long time. The therapist waited. Ethan waited. Finally, the boy spoke. "I don't know if I can forgive you yet. I understand, but I'm willing to try. It was not a happy ending. It was something better. A beginning." Udol de tao, babesai, bela belanam pushab, mazal miran, denem sibam, tabam tetabibam skitsab, betan diamamsum album de betabitamt. New Year's Eve, 1 year after the wrong number text. The penthouse looked different now. Photos covered the walls. Clara and Lily at the zoo. Ethan and Jason at a basketball game. All 4 of them at the beach, laughing at something the camera could not capture. There were toys on the floor, baby gates in the hallways, a high chair in the kitchen, and juice boxes in the refrigerator. The $87 million museum had become a home. Clara stood by the window, watching fireworks explode over Manhattan. Lily, now almost 2 years old, was asleep in the nursery down the hall. Jason was on the couch, teaching Evelyn Marshall's grandson how to play a video game. Ethan appeared beside her, sliding his arm around her waist. "1 year ago," she said softly, "I texted the wrong number. Best mistake you ever made." Clara smiled. "Second best. The first was letting you through the door." Ethan turned her to face him. The city lights caught the wetness in his eyes, the happiness. "I spent 30 years running from what happened to my mother, building walls, pushing people away, convincing myself that I was safer alone. And now I have a family." He pulled her close. "Now I have you, and Lily, and Jason, and I have no idea what I did to deserve any of it." Clara kissed him softly. "You showed up. When a stranger asked for help, you showed up. That's what you did." The clock on his phone hit midnight. Fireworks intensified across the city. "Happy New Year, Clara. Happy New Year, Ethan." Inside the nursery, Lily stirred in her sleep. That soft sound through the baby monitor that still made Ethan's breath catch every time. I should check on her, Clara said. Let me. Ethan released her hand. I've got it. She watched him go. The billionaire, who had never had a family, walking toward the nursery, where a child who was not his by blood had become his in every way that mattered. Her phone buzzed. A text from Evelyn Marshall. Happy New Year, sweetheart. Saw the article about the foundation expansion. Your mama would be so proud. So am I. Clara typed back. Thank you, Mrs. Evelyn. I had a lot of help. From the nursery. Ethan's voice came soft through the monitor. Hey, little one. It's okay. I'm here. Clara smiled and stepped inside. The new year was already beginning. Epilogue. 6 weeks later. Maximum security federal prison. Victoria Mercer sat in the visiting room, waiting. She had lost weight. Prison food did that. She had lost the designer highlights in her hair. Prison barbers did that. She had lost almost everything that once made her powerful. But she had not lost her hatred. The visitor arrived at exactly 2 o'clock. A woman Victoria did not recognize. 50s, gray suit, eyes like a shark. You failed. The woman sat across from Victoria with no pleasantries, no small talk. I underestimated her. Victoria's voice was bitter. The Whitmore woman. She was supposed to be a pawn. You underestimated them both. The woman slid a folder across the table. But Crane was just a foot soldier. The real operation continues. Victoria's eyes narrowed. What operation? The woman smiled. Did you really think Douglas Crane was the top of the food chain? There are people above him, people who have been running this game for decades, people who don't appreciate having their investments disrupted. What do they want? The same thing they've always wanted. Ethan Mercer destroyed, and now we have a new way in. The woman slid a photograph across the table. Clara's face stared up from the glossy paper. She's his weakness now. The woman's smile widened. We'll use her. Victoria leaned forward. How? The same way we used you. We'll make her trust us. And then we'll take everything. The woman stood, straightening her jacket. Happy New Year, Victoria. This is far from over. She walked out of the visiting room without looking back. Victoria stared at the photograph for a long moment. Then she smiled. For the first time in months, she felt something like hope. The game wasn't over, it was just beginning. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something real, do me a small favor. Hit that like button. It tells the algorithm that stories like this matter. Drop a comment below. Tell me, have you ever had a wrong number moment that changed your life? I read every single comment, and your story might inspire someone else who's struggling right now. Share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. You never know who's sitting alone, feeling like there's no way out. And if you haven't already, subscribe and tap that notification bell. Every week, we bring you stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Stories that remind you what humans are capable of when they refuse to give up. Final statement. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time means everything to us. This content was carefully researched, crafted, and manually edited by our team to bring you not just entertainment, but meaning and life lessons that stay with you long after the story ends. Because we believe stories have power. The power to heal, the power to inspire, the power to remind you that no matter how dark tonight feels, tomorrow is still unwritten. Until next time, take care of yourself. And remember, sometimes the wrong number is exactly the right one.